So following on from the last video where we discussed scope, I want to introduce to you the way in which we can change a global variable from within a function. Now the way we can do this is by using the global keyword, but I should warn you that it's not always best practice to use the global keyword, especially if your programs get bigger, as what the global keyword enables you to do is update the value stored in a variable that is then accessible by all parts of your code. So this can obviously lead to some trouble and can cause headaches when you're trying to debug your code when you run into unexpected code behavior. But that being said, as mentioned, the global keyword allows you to modify the variable outside of the current scope. So let's see an example. So first, I'm just going to create a variable called x, and I'm going to set this equal to 5. You can see that when I print out x, I have 5 stored in it. And if I now on the next line of code assign x to have the value 10, you can now see that when I print out x has been updated to store the value 10. So here we are changing the values stored inside of x within the global scope. So if I now set x to equal 100 and then define a function, and we'll call this function func, and inside parentheses we'll pass in x as a parameter. We can then put a colon, we'll then print out x is originally, and then we'll put curly braces. Using the format method, we can then pass in the value of x. Now after this print statement, I'm going to update the value of x to be 200. And then after this variable update, I'm going to print function changed x to be, then put curly braces, and using the format method, we'll once again pass in x. Now when I run this code block and then print out what's stored in x, what value do you think will be printed to the screen? Well, if I print x, you can see we print 100, which is the value stored in x within the global scope. And we know this, we've seen this before, this is because we can't access variables from within a function unless we call the function. So if I call func and then pass in x in the parentheses, which we know would be 100 in this case, we can see that x is originally 100, function changed x to be 200 because we updated x to be 200 within the function, which was then accessed locally by the second print statement. And now if I go back and print what is stored in x, you can see we go back to the original value 100, which is the value stored in x within the global scope. So how can we go about changing x from within a function? Well, let's copy and paste this previous code block below. Now in order to update the global variable x, we need to add one line of code to our function. So rather than passing x into the parentheses, we simply need to add one line of code to make the global variable x accessible. So after the function header, we can put global followed by x, and what this means is that we are now accessing the global variable x, and any reference to x within this function will now change the global variable x. So if I keep the code like this, when I now print out x, you can see that we access the global variable which stores 100. When we now run func, you can see that x is originally 100, and then we print function changed x to be 200. And when I now access the value stored in the global variable x, you can see that we print 200 to the screen. So by reassigning x a value of 200 within the function, because we've used global x within the function definition, it's telling Python to access the global variable x, and any changes to it should occur within the global scope. So be careful when using the global keyword because you will update the global variable when you do so. So some key rules to remember. When we create a variable inside of a function, it is only accessible locally by default, i.e. within the function itself. When we define a variable outside of a function, it is global by default, i.e. it's within the global scope. You don't have to use the global keyword. But if we wanted to change the variable that exists in a global scope inside a function, which by default is a local scope, we use the global keyword. And this will enable us to read and write a global variable inside of a function.